Feeling the need for change is at the heart of your ability to make it happen. Welcome to Turning Inward. I'm Vivian Carrasco, your teacher, mentor, midwife, and host of this amazing podcast. Together, we're going to navigate our interior lives. We're going to unearth our own personal truth, our insights, and our inner knowing. Change what you see in the world, how you make decisions, and the way you lead yourself and others. Welcome back to the Turning Inward podcast. You're in for a treat. It's always a treat when Char, Nancy, and myself get together. You have a bird's eye view, sort of a reality TV look. Us in the middle of it. We've just had, I would call it a group coaching session for the last hour. And we don't ever know where these conversations are going to go, but in my opinion, in my humble opinion, I believe that they go exactly where they need to. And that's kind of how I navigate through life a little bit, or try to. Not so much today, but oh well. So being in the middle of it, life is practice. I'd like to start with that.
Yeah, I love that. Somebody said, I don't know who to quote for this. It's not my thought. If somebody knows where this comes from, I'd love to quote the source or originator of this thought. But that thing about how our minds sort of trick us into thinking we know what's going to happen, but it's always a dress rehearsal. Like there's no, we have a kind of come to these moments where in our interactions with people or just in your day-to-day life that you have this sort of false sense of comfort of like, oh, I've done this before, but really every single time is new, so that kind of the edge of that I find is really interesting, like how we truly are improving all the time, even when we think we're not.
Well, and I want to add a little contrast to that, because that is like novelty in the same is a beautiful life. So, I can look out at my backyard and every day the sun sets, but every day it looks different. And if we follow the trick of our mind and say that it's the exact same sunset every night, then we'll ignore it and we won't get to experience it. So what I want to say is the fact that we allow it to be new, even though our mind is telling us you've done this before, it's going to end up this way. Like that is life in practice. That is what you said, Nancy, life in improv. Because when you approach something and you don't have that flexibility or that openness, you have a completely different experience in life. And I'm going to just stand right here. I'm going to have a perspective. I'm going to have a point of view. And because that's part of what I'm developing, right, is my authority in my own point of view. I believe that this position is richer than the other, where you are in a fixed mindset and you don't see anything as different and you aren't open to a new experience with maybe the same person or a sunset in the same location. And that feels really hard right now. Like me being authoritative. Woo. But that's what I believe.
I think that what I keep coming back to, right, is the paradoxical nature of all of this, which I think is exactly what you're pointing to, because you want to be open, you want to have that beginner's mind, and you also know that you can't take in everything that's available. It's too much. Something has to help you navigate. Your mind wants to make predictions, and sometimes the predictions are helpful to you. It may, one of your mind's predictions might keep you alive. If it says, wait, don't step off that curb, the light just turned green, So it's like you want it to keep it in its place, right? You want to keep the looking ahead, looking back, looking ahead, being in the moment, and how you're integrating all that. There's that word, right? It's this constant dance that you're doing. And I guess the reason we can have these conversations about it and the reason that we find it so interesting is because we're aware of this is going on within us. And that happens in a moment-to-moment way. I'm kind of at the edge here, but it's like being able to observe yourself, negotiating all those needs within yourself, and then taking that out into connection with the world is living with, it is kind of like being awake, right? It's like being aware. It's living in a different way than maybe we do when we're just being reactive or,
Tired.
yeah.
So the audience, so the listener, I'm talking to you, listener. You didn't get to hear our 1 hour group session. And we talked a lot about integration. And that's why Char said, here comes that word again, integrity and integration. Nancy, you had a really good description of that. Do you remember what you said?
Oh, well, I was thinking about it as integrity sort of being not a permanent location, but kind of an alignment where you have integrated enough information about something to feel in integrity with yourself, with your actions, with your words, like kind of. So integrity is, we were kind of illustrating an example too, where talking about how when you've worked on a pattern that you are used to recreating, and in this case, it was like a relationship, when you're used to just recreating a particular dynamic and pattern and playing it out, but then you might intervene and you're like, what, I don't like what happens there, because we always end up in a fight. And so you actively engage with coaching tools or, mindfulness practices or, risk showing up or saying something differently to sort of recreate how that pattern or dynamic might play out so it feels better and you can be more connected maybe versus ending up in a fight. And so through that lens, we were kind of saying that like being in integrity is sort of also just reaching a place of integration with those tools. Like you're able to do enough experimentation and work and communication or conversation or connection to find that space that we would call integrity.
And you also said it, so I'm going to lead you here because it was beautiful and I wrote it down. That's how beautiful it was. You mentioned chemistry and the dissolution, that the solution comes from a dissolution. Dissolving, yes. Tell us that part.
Oh my gosh, I'm on the spot. There's the reason I'm an artist. That's the one chemistry lesson. I feel like, and I don't even know if it would hold up in a court of chemistry if there is such a thing, but I just had this idea that like, in order to find a solution, like you have to dissolve first. So I just use this visual metaphor of like, if you put salt in water, for example, like the salt dissolves and then it creates a solution. So like that is just my little, kind of visual, practical metaphor to play around with that. Like you need enough stuff has to dissolve to really create a different solution, basically.
I just remembered and I may completely botch this too, but there's the concept of being like a lake. So if you put a little bit of salt in a cup of water, it tastes really salty. But if you put a little bit of salt in a lake, you barely notice because it's so big, it can accommodate the little additive of that salt. And so like when we're in this state of being in the moment, knowing that we really move back and forth, the being like a lake means being able to take into account more, right? It's more spacious, it's expansive, it can accommodate a lot.
I just want to share an experience that as a follow-up to that, Char, as I just said, I used the word tired, and I had shared with y'all before we started recording that maybe I am tired, and because, this broke and that didn't work, and it's like, what is happening? But what I wanted to share is when we started talking and when I was present in our conversation, I started having these huge yawns and just felt my shoulders come back, so I think my body was doing exactly what you just described. It was allowing for more. It was, and integrating in what I was experiencing. So I just wanted to share that as a life and practice and to also say yes.
So another thing that we were talking about in the conversation earlier was my experiences with my mom, who is older and sick. And kind of a similar kind of thing where I discovered that there were more ways to respond to the situation and the relationship than I believed going in. And then the standard wisdom of what people tell me I should be doing or she should be doing or whatever. So the example that I was giving was she lives on her own still, but she's frail now. And everybody asks, well, do you have one of those life alert things? And every time they ask, I would be like, I don't want to deal with this. But, all right, it's my responsibility. So we're going to have the conversation. So I talked to my mom about it and she was like, ick. She's like, if you want me to have it. And I'm like, well, no, I don't want you to have it unless it would make you feel safer. Well, she really didn't want it. And I didn't actually really want her to have it. I don't want her to feel like she's an emergency waiting to happen. So I guess, what is my point here? My point here is like what I believed about my not feeling good about it, I could make that mean that I just don't want to deal with this. But what it turned out to be was she didn't want it, right? And so that's partly what I was responding to, guessing that she didn't want it, and then finding out that she was right. And like figuring out for myself, well, is this something I require because people say she should, or because does it actually make me feel safer, et cetera, et cetera. And so I answered those answers for myself, but she's the one who had to use it and she didn't want it. So that's where we ended up. We were like, no, and now we can just be at peace. People say, oh, do you have the life alert? We discussed it. And there's this being the lake, it's like, we don't have to do what we're told. We can wait and sit it out and see, who really feels what and what's really coming from which side. And, until we're perfectly clear, we've decided we're good.
Well, and one thing that you did that I want to point out again for the listener, because we might do this unconsciously, but it's important to bring it to a conscious level. And what you did is where I find myself having a lot of coaching conversations is, what is the deeper intention? What do you want? And you honed in on the heart of it right in that conversation with your mom. Like, does it make you feel safe? Because that was what you wanted, was to feel safe. I just wanted to point that out because that takes the conversation from that first level of people are telling you to do it, right? To what is it that's going on here? And then having the conversation to figure out what is it that you want from it. And if it's not giving you from your want, what you want, then, you throw it out the window. It's not for us.
That's so great that you said that, because I honestly, at this point, don't even realize I'm doing it anymore.
Mm-hmm.
It's just so ingrained in how I go about things. And it's a game changer.
It is a game changer. And if you're listening to this and you can notice, because that's the first step in this, is just bringing your awareness to it, attention to it, and seeing what you see. The more you look, the more that you'll see. When you can do what Char just did and get right to the heart of what you want, then there's confidence in throwing away that cultural expectation, in my opinion. Tell me where I'm wrong, Char.
I 100% agree.
That was beautiful. I just wanted to point that out. This is life coaching reality radio.
And to add to that too a little, because this is such a great example, having the life alert thing, monitor, necklace, whatever, wasn't actually going to keep her safe. She might still fall, she might still, so it's like the idea there is even more around, do I trust if I fall that, or whatever, that whatever happens with that will be okay, that someone will be there or they won't, it's like she really reached into some places there to just be okay for herself, with whatever the consequences of that might mean or be or look like, as did you. You gave her that space too, to experience her life with whatever consequences may arise with her choices. And you both ended up ultimately being on the same page with allowing each other that kind of freedom. But that's huge.
Oh, I just got body chills. But what you also allowed for Char is to disagree with her and allow her to have her experience. If she had chosen it, you would have given it to her because it made her feel safe.
100%.
Yeah, but we're not always there. So bravo to you.
Thank you. Yeah. It's interesting to see how useful the coaching tools are, you know?
Can I pick at you a little with that? Because I would really love to know, so like sort of what tools or like how, if you don't mind sharing more, of course, sort of like what tools or what you needed to do to approach that? Like kind of where did you start and how did you end up being in integrity with your decision and her decision and the result of that?
Yes. So the first thing that I use to navigate in life is the body compass, which is something that Martha Beck has in her books. I think it's probably in the very first one. Which book is it? It's Finding Your Own North Star. Yes. So it's does this feel good and right to me or does it not? Right? Not in a hedonistic kind of way. Right? Do you guys want me to actually take people through the steps of how to do the body compass?
I can include it as a resource. I'll put a link.
Okay.
But that's where you start, is with your body.
Exactly. I start with my body. So I notice what my body feels like. Now I've done enough inquiry into my own reactions to things so that I know that, if I have a feeling in the pit of my stomach, it means one thing to me. It's dread, kind of whatever, annoyance tells me something else, So I have these bodily reactions and I pay attention to them and I ask, what is the message that I'm getting from this? And I can get a lot of information about what's going on within me and around me because I'm sensitive to the people around me. So that's where I start. And when things feel fine, if everything feels free and relaxed and peaceful, I have no problem. We move along on whatever course we're moving along on and, we laugh and have a good time and there's nothing to do. But lots of times I have, more troubling sensations. And when I do, I look further to see, what's going on here. And that's when, the opening up comes in and being in the moment and observing and then asking, okay, so if I feel like I'm being in this situation encouraged down a path that doesn't feel right to me, and I suspect doesn't feel right to my mother. Okay, so that's when I ask, okay, well, what's our intention? What is it we're trying to accomplish here? And then, so that's a conversation my mother and I can have. I first, of course, for my own integrity, examine what it is that I want out of this. And then I examine, not even examine, I probably make a guess about who's got the final word, which when it's a question about, what will she do? She's got the final word, just the way it is, whether I like it or not, not that I usually don't like it, but because I'm kind of made that way to begin with, I think.
Well, I just wanted to rephrase it because it's beautiful. So you start with your own experience. You examine your own heart, your body sensation. The other thing I heard, Char, that you do is that you have a language for your own sensation. So you've done this long enough that you're able to recognize and name, oh, this means that. This sensation in this part of my body feeling this way means that I'm experiencing this. And for contrast, for you, the listener, what I also want to share is when I had to look at the things breaking and falling and tripping outside of me, I will say that it's because I wasn't tuned into my own experience. And once I slowed down and I had this, sacred circle of women, wise women around me, I recognized that I was tired. It was as simple as that. Because I'm like, why is this happening on the outside? But on the inside, you're tired. You need to rest. So that's where you started. I just wanted to reframe that because it was so beautiful. Like just having that language where you name, not even intentionally out loud, but you recognize it. Like it's a knowing, an intimacy with yourself. It's so beautiful.
Yeah. And it's so much a part of me now that I forget I'm doing it, which it can be for anyone. You just have to practice it. It's as simple as that. I have no special power.
Well, until you don't, like me, right? And then you're like, of course.
Of course.
But I think
Yeah.
you do, though, because I think that part of it fundamentally, like, is just being curious about your experience. Like, you kind of need to, like, the intention, meta intention, maybe just to be, even be willing to be curious about yourself and what's going on. And you wouldn't have been able to even know you were tired if you didn't have a curiosity, you know, like the wondering, you know, which is breaking patterns, right? It's like sort of even with your sort of relationship that you have with your body and emotions and signals it gives you, Char, it's like they're clues, like just to tune in.
Yes, that's exactly right. Because sometimes I'll be getting the clues and ignoring them, for sure. I mean, that's usually step one, right?
Like we hit the gas when the yellow light at the stoplight instead of slowing down.
Yeah, I'm not stopping for this. Yeah, 100%.
There's no signal there. My way. No.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Raising my hand to that one. Yeah.
yeah.
But just cultivating that curiosity, like what's going on here? Or like just noticing your frustration with the environment and things happening around you and being like, oh, what's going on? How can I take care of myself? What do I need? What's happening? Like just, it's attuning to yourself, like the parent kind of asking the child when it's fussing, sort of like, hey, baby, what's going on? That kind of kindness, like starting with that kind of kindness and curiosity for yourself.
Right. And moving through a process like diaper okay, no bumps, you doing the examination. I feel compelled to just say out loud consciously, like this podcast is called Turning Inward. And that's the direction that we need to begin in when we're creating change, when we're in a threshold or we're crossing a threshold, even though, and it might be culture, it might be our brain, I don't know what it is, but we are compelled to look on the outside and try to change that thing that is happening on the outside. But we begin, and we all do it differently. You just described your process, Char. We begin by turning inward, by the word you just used, Nancy, is tuning in, by deepening, like what is happening with me? Because until we get straight with our own heart, we don't, here comes that word, we're not in integrity, we're not aligned. I just thought it was cool because, 4 years ago or 5 now, when I started this podcast, I had no idea what those 2 words meant. Hand to heart. Like I just knew that was what I needed to explore and unfold. And it's beautiful for me to look at it here from back then and just follow it. Like you just said, Char, it's the beauty of technology. It's just this, turning inward. Like I had to unfold what that meant and I'm still unfolding it. And I believe that it'll continue to unfold throughout our lives because like we said earlier, this is a living practice. We practice life. We have it. We engage in it.
I just think that's super cool that you started a podcast. Like, how trusting and creative is that? And a while ago, you were saying something, Vivi, about like feeling like you were an authority or taking an authoritative stand about, kind of at the beginning of our conversation. And it sounded to me what you were saying at the moment there was sort of like taking an authoritative stand in a way on like being willing to be in creative collaboration, and then turning inward is sort of like, okay, so how do I find the tools to do that, in a way that meets myself where I am, draws me into deeper and greater connection with others, invites into my life and world what it is I want to experience.
That's true, Nancy. And thank you for reflecting that back to me because I'm going to rewind and listen to that. In the moment, my mind and my heart were in dialogue, I'll say. And one of the things that, the story, the pattern that I have is that there's always more to learn. I don't know enough. Like we've jokingly said it probably half a dozen times already. I'm not the authority in this, but, right? So what I wanted to physically do, because I'm standing up right now, I wanted to say, this is my space. I stand in this position, and this is difficult because I want everyone to love me, right? And when I stand in this space and I take on this position and this perspective, this point of view, I have to be okay with a third of the people who aren't going to like it. And I guess that's what I was saying to myself is be brave here. Have some courage, right? This is who you are and this is what you believe, and that is not wrong for me. I think that I'll have to continue doing that at different levels, just like life, just like, you peeling back the onion. We just get deeper and deeper and deeper into it. And hopefully someday I'll literally just like know to my bones what those 3 principles are, what those 5 skills are that are unfolding in front of me, that have unfolded over the last 5 years that I'm trying to put to paper. That's the intention. And thank you, Char, for bringing that up. Like, that's the intention. I want to have a knowing in my bones of the structure of these teachings. I want to have it at a conscious level. So I have to embody it. And that's what I was doing. I just pushed mute to have a big old sigh too, Char.
It's so, I just sighed right on air. People. It's so, well, I loved hearing you say all that because it's weaving so many things together for me in this conversation that are sort of about authority and what we've been taught that is, which is sort of like, I know everything or something like that. And now I have power over you, versus what you're describing, which is really like locating yourself in a place of integrity and wisdom and knowing based on your experience and what you know to be true for you, and offering and sharing that while meeting yourself over and over so that location can change. It's not like a hardening into a stance per se. It's like this continual dance of knowledge and understanding and wisdom and questioning and deepening. Like it's like the lake Char was talking about. It's like, it's deep and it's wide and it's gracious.
I'm going to say this even though it might make me sound like a non-authority, but when I did my branding, the swirl came up, and I had a wonderful person who guided me through that experience. And what you just described, that's my symbol, is the swirl. And I actually didn't understand the complexity of its meaning until a client told me. Like, this is what drew me in, was what this symbol means. And I looked at her and I was like, thank you. Like, now I understand it at that level, because, it wasn't that when it came up, but it deepens and deepens and deepens. So thank you, Nancy. Ooh,
Isn't that a perfect example of courage? Because it felt right to you, even though you couldn't even articulate it. And you were like, okay, I'm going to put that out there and see if other people respond to it. And then you received from that act of courage the gift of someone coming back and reflecting to you, this is what it means to me. And you're like, wow.
I did. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Wait, I have to say this before I forget.
Okay, go ahead.
So I had this image while you were talking about how sometimes we use spirals to like sort of put a place on a map, or like a labyrinth or whatever. Like it's about, in some ways too, it's like, it is saying, meet me here, and inviting people in. It can be so many things, including a physical location and space, like the within university or your book you're offering, or, like, I don't know if that made sense to anyone except for me, but I'm like, whoa,
I love that on so many levels. Like a point in the map, like me here. Oh my God. Yes.
I actually remember hearing someone say that our bodies are actually exactly that, a location in space and time.
Yes. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes.
I'm going to say this, and again, I'm being vulnerable because I feel silly admitting this, but it's true. Our bodies are a location in space and time. And you know what? It's interesting, like as I take walks or as I move through like something, like this weekend we were going on these rugged dirt paths with the bikes, and the hard physical reality was that there were rocks and there were roots from trees and there were, there was hills and elevation, but
ouch.
Yeah, trust me, the bruises, they're not pretty. Ugly bruises. I'm all in one piece. There's one location to this body, which is amazing. Thank you. because it was scary. But I moved through the world like without those obstacles in front of me, looking, like imagining that God, I need my words so I can say it, but like there's a pretend hill that's guiding me a little bit left. Or there's a nudge that says walk this direction instead of that one. Like it doesn't have to be physical anymore to meander me, if that makes sense. And that's a beautiful, like, it doesn't happen all the time, but when it does, I'm so in it and enjoying it because it's like I'm in another world in this reality. It's interesting. I haven't said that out loud to anyone, by the way. So hopefully nobody will come looking for me with a white coat.
I don't think so.
I like how you said that, like allowing it to meander me. Like it's sort of, to me, like when I hear that, I feel like the more you tune into your soul and spirit and animus and life force that's driving you, that it is taking you on a path. And that path might be right into the rocks or right into the whatever, but like your trust and faith in where that will lead you and what it's going to guide you through is magical, you know?
Yes. Yeah. And it is trust and faith built on experience, like tiny little experiments that have just built up over time to where I know that path, that journey is an easier journey than when I pretend that I'm in the driver's side with all the gears and, I'm the one making the left and right turns, it's like more of being in a glider, and letting and adjusting my body to the wind rather than a car where I'm in control. How about that for metaphors? I'd never thought about that before. Isn't it beautiful that these things are recorded? Like our own reflection gives us so much information.
Yeah, because I was sort of like, that sounds like a cool car. I'm a little bit of a closet gearhead. What does that car look like? Maybe let's design it.
Oh,
That's so funny because I had a completely different picture. I'm like, I'm going to go flying with Vivi. It's like, I'm just like soaring up like a hot air balloon.
I love
it's
it.
both and.
So that way and the other way. Yeah.
Yeah. It's both and. It's that improv that Nancy talks about, right?
Mm-hmm.
I want a hot air balloon with a stick shift. Like I want to be able to control the flow.
Well, that's the perfect metaphor though, right? Because you want to be able to like flow, right? With life. You want to be in the flow of life. You want to be in the flow of experience. And yet, because you do have a physical body, you have to safeguard it in some ways. You can't just go into the ocean and float away. It will not work out for you if you plan to live, more than a week or so. I don't know how long you can live floating around on the ocean, but, not 90 years. So, it's like you have to have some boundaries about what you expect your body to do, I think. Tell me where I'm wrong.
I need better boundaries because the bruises are telling me I pushed them too much.
Well, I think it's that integrity piece again, right? It's like, even if you're going with the flow and you're sailing a boat, to the extent with what is in your human control, you are wanting to, follow the winds this way or that way towards what it is you want to experience. Like you can't promise you'll get there or experience things exactly how you want to, but there is a part of us that, like you're saying, Char, is like, does makes some active choices and takes some responsibility for what it is we want to do and how we want to experience stuff to the extent that we're able.
And what's coming up for me is that you have to face the resistance. Like you're facing the wind. Like, earlier you said, Char, I had to get to a place where I was going to have that conversation with my mother. Like that's it right there. That's the living practice. That's going with the flow, tuning into yourself, but also facing the wind because you're going to have the conversation. Without those, conversations, we're avoiding it.
Well, and my guess too, like in that really specific example was like, you were curious and wondering and willing to hear what your mom's choice would be. And if she said, yes, absolutely, I want the, alert bracelet, you then were going to meet yourself with her decision then, because, there might be some choices there. If you didn't want to be the person that was on call 24/7 for the alert, or however that gets set up, it's like, okay, well, she can say what she wants to choose, and I'm still going to find my integrity and willingness and what choices and possibilities are available here to be a support and actualize that for her. And if you didn't want to be the person on the spot or whatever, and that was really what was true for you, that you were still going to be in a communication about how to navigate that in a way that worked best for everyone. And that's hard to do. Like, it's hard to have and meet people in circumstances and ourselves in those situations with that kind of openness, which is why I was really curious about your process and how you feel your way through that and what that looks like. Because I think that's what a lot of us who come into the coaching community and looking for tools and supports, it's like having those examples of real life experiences help me understand more about what that might look like, continual meeting of self and other in that dance and those patterns, and how to keep doing it in ways that are in integrity and where you're not being the one in charge and control of, everything and everyone else,
Yeah. I tell you, one of the most helpful things I learned was a definition of integrity that was presence. So being able to be present, truthful, and kind. If I can do all three of those things, then I'll find the way. I find that tremendously helpful as a touch point coming back, to the what's my intention? What do I want? That's what I want, and truthful is subjective. It's my truth. I don't know your truth. That's your domain. And kind is not the same as nice. So again, it's my truth about what's kind, what feels compassionate to me, what feels like the right place to draw the boundary that feels to me, the way I do it is, what feels peaceful in my body, what feels nonviolent, what feels right, for lack of a better word, inside of me. So that, like when Byron Katie asks, what would love do? That to me is kindness. Being nice is, is more superficial. It's more concerned with whether the other person thinks well of me, like I'm presenting myself in a way so that someone will like me. That's more nice. Kind is the other thing that I just described.
That's an important distinction. I just wanted to draw more attention to it. Thank you. This probably goes without saying, but if I sense that we need a reminder, we, including me, that kindness includes ourselves, like being compassionate towards our own experience. I would never say the things I say to myself out loud to other people often. And it accelerates a little bit. I'm hoping it, and like keeping my fingers crossed, knocking on something, it's the pace of it accelerates. Like maybe it took me 40 years to get to a certain point, but it only took maybe 5 years to get to the next level, right? Like it's not taking me as long, it feels like. And it's exciting to see or to anticipate like how much more it'll deepen, or how much more. Like I used to have this Chicken Little syndrome, like everything's good right now, but the sky is going to fall. Like enjoy this because it's going to go away. And at some point I just accepted, it's okay that this is good, and more than likely it will continue, right? And that there's a peace to living that way and not anticipating the next emergency or the next thing that happened, not knowing that there's a potential there for it, but not like looking for it, if that makes sense. It was beautiful when that went away, when I wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop. And I think that we partly have to get used to the level of happiness we're at. Kind of we have to get used to the level of, like, when you go into higher elevations and you have to get used to the way that you have to breathe there. I'm saying this out loud, not having, explored this before, but that's what's coming up for me in the moment, is that I was adjusting to the inner temperature of my happiness going up. And there was a period of integration that had to happen, as I was crossing into those tick marks. It was a different threshold for me. I had to integrate it.
Well, what that brings to mind for me is what Brene Brown says, right? Nothing scares us more than joy, because, the rug's going to be pulled out from under you, right? It's almost like it's a forbidden thing that if we go too close to the happiness, something bad will happen.
That foreboding joy. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
So I over that hump and I'm so excited. Yes.
Yeah. I don't actually think that I suffered from that much in my life. Well, but I had a different syndrome, right? So mine was, if everything stays the same, I'm safe because it's known, right? Like, this will last forever. And then when it didn't, I was like, wait, what? And then my mind told me, as a child, right? Oh, change is bad. Change makes you uncomfortable. You don't want any of that. So try to, avoid it. So in my growing up, it was like, we're happy if everything stays just like it is now, but we don't want anything to change. That was like the stance, the family stance, which of course is, untenable. Life doesn't work that way. I had to learn how to like change.
And learning to change, and the 21 truths for the 21st century.
I'm not familiar with that.
The critical skill that he mentions for the next century is this learning change. Learning how we learn, and we learn through experience, drip by drip, small, but learning to change because our life is so much longer than it was 100 years ago. My grandparents, my great grandparents probably lived to 40, and, we've gotten, I might live to 110, which is a lot older than, my previous generations. And that because we don't have as many rituals and ceremony after the work stage, right? There's just retirement for the next 60 years. Like, that's not sustainable. So we have to, like, that evolution of change and allowing those identities to dissolve, like, we said earlier, and then reintegrating it into that new identity. That's a critical skill for us.
Well, and, technologically, and probably in every way at this point, the world is changing much more rapidly than it did in the past. So there's another reason. I think that, the kids that are born today they're starting out on a different level.
That's true. They're starting on a different level. Amen. Yes, they are. His name is Yuval Noah Harari. That is the gift of technology. I was able to bring that up just with a little Google.
Yeah, I think there's idea too of sort of like disintegration to come into places of integrity too, and sort of those ego deaths, and sort of what I experience and I know Vivi, well, both of us, all of us, really appreciate and have our own different ways of experiencing cultivating like creative processes and practices that, like, it's the way we are able to be with that death, rebirth, recreate, death, rebirth cycle that, like, Maria Clarissa Pinkola, if I'm saying her name right, talks about. And I think children, to your point, they're born into an era where I'm sure they experience a sense of permanence, but the impermanence of it does seem to me, as a nearly 50-year-old, they must just deal with a lot more sense of impermanence than I did, even growing up, because technology shifts, it does seem, very quickly, and world and environment and all that. And so being able to be a conscious creator and aware of your conscious creative cycles and preferences and how that works naturally and organically, and being able to tend to that is sort of, it does seem like a new kind of, not new, but in a kind of leadership and mastery that really is important to evolve moving forward. Being in process, like you said, like life is a practice, like but like really getting that. And so in the multifaceted and paradoxical ways that shows up, you know.
Do you, Nancy?
I hate change. I do. I am still such a resistor. Like, I just want to, or at least maybe I'm just going through, boy, when ego deaths happen, sometimes they're not pretty. I feel like I've been going through a real, like, dark night of the soul lately with some of this stuff, letting go and shedding and wanting to just, you know, double down and grip even tighter of wanting to have a sense of control and control outcomes and that kind of stuff. And something you were saying earlier, Char, made me think about this too, that like I'm kind of in this state of, as I'm going through it, it's feeling so unfamiliar, even though it's a very natural process, I think. And for me, what's happening is I experience sort of similar to what you said, where like, as long as nothing changes, we're okay. But even if you want to choose to change, you need to disintegrate something or let go of something, dissolve something in order to welcome something else. And that involves a risk. It reminds me of the experiment with the kids and the marshmallows. Like, do you want to have your one marshmallow now or wait and maybe get two or whatever that one is? Like I want my marshmallow and know I'm having my marshmallow, you know, like, and so for me, like, as I've sort of met myself in that place where I realize like that way of really planning or controlling and strategizing, like, isn't working as well for me in the way it has been, and wanting to shift into more like creative and collaborative relationship with my life and what I'm doing. And I'm just in the midst of it where, you know, it's hard and I want to grip things. And my emotions are sort of like, I just call it like emotional turbulence. And it's that expanding capacity for more that you were kind of talking about earlier too, Vivi, where like my emotional range used to be a bit narrower. And now I'm like getting so much more excited about stuff. And then I feel self-conscious and worried and ashamed and, you know, because I had dampened all that down. And so I'm noticing, you know, that sort of awakening on that part of the spectrum and bandwidth. And at the same time, I'm like plunging into like real depths of darkness and super intense emotionality that I haven't experienced in a while. And it is sort of that altitude metaphor of like, you know, at some point, this will be the more normal and I'll regulate to the flow of these things. But for now, like when you're in the midst of those change cycles, like, whoa, you can really wonder like what on earth is happening. And that sort of spiral image feels really beautiful and useful and helpful for me to remember that like it's movement and there's that invitation there to kind of turn inward. And at some point I sort of think of them like DNA strands, like you've talked about before, where like you turn out again and it's like, whoa, and then you turn in and it's sort of like, but just, you know, life as the practice is like, yeah, it's like holding space for the wild ride, like on your bike, like it's, whoa, a lot happens. And it isn't always like easy. It isn't always, yeah, like there's some, you know, tough parts to it, but I agree, you know, pretty heartedly with, and what both of you always talk about too, that it's sort of like, you know, I'm always more willing to walk into that fire because, you know, like it may be a bumpy ride, but what you reach on the other side feels better, feels like greater integrity. And then you can be in those places where like you're offering that kind of integrity and freedom and mutuality that you're describing in your relationship, navigating that choice with your mom, Char, you know, like.
Yeah. The payoff is really, it's tangible and it's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
It ripples out.
Mm-hmm.
I think maybe is what you're also saying.
And you're trusting and you have faith that the fire will take you there, like it's leading you.
Yes, that's what it's for.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it's for.
Yeah, but we don't recognize it in the middle of it.
Yeah.
It is, that is what it's for.
Yeah.
And for marshmallows.
And
circles circles like this.
Oh, what a beautiful, beautiful conversation. I just want to say that my hunch is that we all move through that type of transformation, at different planes, different levels of our life, different aspects of it. So thank you, Nancy, for describing it. While I was listening to you, I was just like, I remember,
And not all transitions are that gritty, but some of them really are, So I just don't want people to think they're doing something wrong, I guess, is maybe why I offer that and say what I say out loud sometimes.
I'm glad you said it, because I've been having a similar, sort of swing in my emotional experience that you described. And I feel so much better knowing that I'm not the only one.
You're not the only one. And I'm talking to you, the listener. Like this, you're not the only one moving through it. We're all going through it. There's no way to do it wrong. It's impossible to do it wrong because you're doing it like it's yours to do. It is your living practice. And with that, we will wrap up our heart-to-heart conversation for this episode of the Turning Inward podcast. Thank you for listening. Thank you for joining us and meeting us here.